NATO's hope is that its presence will make smuggling harder and eventually bring people trafficking across the Aegean to an end. How realistic is that? And how exactly will this mission work? I'm joined by Kurt Volker, the former U.S. ambassador to NATO. He's now executive director of the McCain Institute for International Leadership at Arizona State University. Kurt, you just watched the story. I mean, this is just one guy, and you think about all he goes to get into that chopper, and then what happens to him next. I mean, we've seen these migrant journeys. It's just horrendous. What can NATO do?
Well, unfortunately, NATO is going to do very, very little. This, I believe, is an effort by Germany and Turkey to give the appearance that they're doing something. What they've done is they've asked NATO to monitor the movement of refugees, and that may provide information about smugglers that they can then pass on to Turkish authorities or to Greek authorities. And to the extent that there are ships that are not seaworthy and they're in trouble at sea, they can rescue these refugees and then take them back to Turkey, which is probably what's going to happen to that guy with the helicopter.
Smugglers don't leave fingerprints, though, do they? I mean, they're pretty tough to track down, aren't they? I mean,
and the only thing would be if they are traveling with these refugees at all, then they could be identified. But they're going to try to avoid that. Their goal is to get these people on a boat, hopefully a seaworthy boat, and get them across and get the money and then do it all over again.
You were there with NATO. If you were sitting in on these meetings, would you say, I don't think this is a good idea? Or would you come up with a different strategy? Or?
Well, yes. So look, I mean, you have a humanitarian impulse. You don't want people to die in capsizing boats at sea. So if NATO can help to rescue people who are at sea and also to identify the patterns of what's going on, great, go ahead and do it. But that is not going to solve the problem. And that's where I think NATO's focus ought to be. I think we're going to have to do something about the Syrian crisis. And frankly, these talks in Munich and before that in Vienna are a joke. You got to have a space on the ground that's safe for Syrian people. You got to have a balance of forces that creates the conditions for negotiations. None of that exists right now. So you got to actually step in much more aggressively to support the opposition in Syria and get a negotiated ceasefire out of that. That's what's going to then dry up the refugee flow. And you do have to have a policy of returning refugees from where they came. Now, you can't do that immediately because it's just not safe, but that has to be something in the back of everybody's mind so that the refugees know that even if they do make it as far as Greece or elsewhere, they're going to get turned back.
And more of an expanded role in Syria itself. How might that look?
Well, I think you got to do a couple of things. You got to have a no-fly zone and a safe space, a zone that's protected on the ground inside Syria. That's going to take ground forces. That means you're going to have a coalition that's going to involve some neighboring states, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, probably the Kurds from Iraq, and they would cooperate with the United States and other West Europeans to create a zone inside Syria that's safe. Once you do that, you're going to have a place where refugees can be. Now, it's going to be dicey because you have the Russians in there, the Iranians in there, and there's fighting going on. But if you can start to create a balance of forces where things are then in a clear territory, then I think you can have the basis of negotiating a settlement. As it is, the Russians, the Iranians, the Syrian government think that they are on the march, and they are not going to give up anything in any talks at all.
It's interesting you threw out just a few names, but I mean, you need a scorecard. There's a whole bunch more than that. If NATO isn't prepared to jump in after hospitals and schools are hit, though, when are they prepared to do
Well, that's the sad thing, is when you look at NATO, what do you see? You see the United States doesn't want to get boots on the ground, wants to do the minimum necessary, only wants to focus on attacking ISIS, minimally support the opposition, but tell them not to fight the Assad regime. Russia's doing exactly the opposite. They're ignoring ISIS, they're supporting the regime, they're attacking the moderate opposition, and they're actually in there in force with their own military bases. Turkey doesn't like the Kurds having arms. The Saudis want to support the Sunnis against the government, and so they're not willing to support groups that won't fight the government. We got a big mess in there right now. This is where I think it does take the United States to show a lot more leadership and a lot more skin in the game to convince people that we can bring about a solution if we all work together. Two common goals: safe space for the Syrian people, defeat ISIS, and then you'll have to negotiate a settlement with the Assad regime that maybe is reshaping Syria a little bit.
I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it sounds to me as though the ships are window dressing so that people are looking over here instead of looking where they should be looking, where the real issue is, where it's much tougher to do.
That's right. No, what we have here is everyone has a humanitarian, impulse that we've got to do something about helping these refugees. Don't let them die at sea. Do something about this flow. But the doing something that would be effective is too hard to contemplate So we do something that is substantially less than that.
What about the winter is terrible. Once the temperatures warm up, do you expect even more
Yes.
people? And then what does that do?
I was speaking last week with the defense minister of Macedonia, and he was saying that the number of refugees that have made it into Macedonia this January is double the number of last January. We just saw in the report that the number crossing the seas is up from where we were 1 year ago. And then with the siege of Aleppo that we've seen in the past week, that's going to create a massive refugee flow as well. I think this summer is going to be far worse than last summer.
Kurt Volker, doesn't sound very optimistic, but I'm sure
Sorry to say.
it's probably right on target. Thanks so much.
All right, Mike,
Appreciate it.
thank you.